In this video, you're going to understand the effects of block scoping on functions in ES6. So what we're going to do, we're going to create a block, and inside the block, we're going to create functions and call them. And then we're going to create another sub block, and then we're going to create new functions inside and call them. And then we'll see how all these functions are going to interact with each other. So first, let's create a function greet, which logs hi. So we're creating it inside this block. Now let's create another function greet, which logs hello inside the sub block. Now if you call greet right there, you get hi, because you're going to look in the same scope as where you're calling the function, and here is your function. That's why it's logging hi. And the same thing happens if you call greet just before the declaration, and it's going to return hi thanks to hoisting. Now if you call greet inside this block, you expect to get hello, right? Because you're looking in the same scope as where you're calling the function, and here is the declaration you're going to be using. Perfect. Now what happens if you call greet right there? You're getting hi, and that's because you're looking in the same scope of the call. So you're ignoring this block because that's considered a separate scope, and you find the declaration right there, and that's the one you're going to be using. So this one returns hi. So up till now, it all makes sense. And remember that we wrapped everything inside curly braces, creating a separate block in the global scope. So let's add a comment there. All right, perfect. Now we're going to try something different. So instead of wrapping everything inside a block, we're going to write our code in the global scope straight away. So we're going to delete those curly braces, and we will see what happens. Ready? So let's run this code. Here we go. The first call of greet returns hi, thanks to hoisting. So we're using that declaration. The second one returns hi because you're using that declaration. Okay, so this is no surprise. This is exactly what you would have expected. Perfect. Now let's go inside this block. So you're creating greet again, and this one is logging hello because you're looking in the same scope of the call, and here is your function greet, and you're using that piece of code, and you're getting hello. Now what's happening with the last one? So we're getting hello instead of hi. So the thing is, when you call the function in this scope, the global scope, so we're calling the function in the global scope, it's going to be able to look inside blocks which are created in the global scope. So although this block is considered as a separate scope when it comes to variables created using the let declaration, so if you write let x equal to 1, and you call x in the global scope, you know that you're going to get an error. X is not defined, because that block is considered as a separate scope. But what's happening with the function greet? We're accessing the block and we're getting the value from there. Well, the thing is, if you call a function in the global scope in ES6, and there is a block in the global scope preceding that function, then that function is going to be able to use or access the block and use the declaration of the function or the value of the function from there. And make sure that you remember this because it's very important. Now, let's try something else. Let's create another block inside this block and create another function, greet, and this time let's log hi there. We're still getting the same results, okay, because when we are accessing this block in the first scope, we're gonna use that function and we're not gonna use that one. Now what happens if this function didn't exist? So when you call greet right there, you're using, it returns hi because you're using that value which is in the global scope. And as we know, functions inside a block, they do have access to the outer environment. In our case, we do have access to greet. So we are gonna give more priority, or the priority here is gonna be going to the outer environments instead of going inside a subblock. All right, so now what happens if this one didn't exist? So first of all, we're getting an error because you're calling greet right there, and although you have declared greets inside a subblock of this block, this function does not have access to it. The reason why is because this block is coming afterwards, after the call. So if you comment both those lines and you call greet right there, you're still getting an error because this one, greet, does not have access to that one. And the reason why is because it's wrapped inside a block. So when a function is wrapped inside a block, it's not going to have access to blocks which are inside that global block. All right. Now, if I comment that, then this one is working because this one is called in the global scope. So it's going to have access to this block, which is coming right before. Okay. So we're not going to have an error like we had with that one and that one because the block this time is coming before the call. All right, so we're not using hoisting here. It's just that the block is before the function. So when we are executing the code, we're going line by line, and then we are defining the value of the function greet right there. So we're using that one. So this function again has got access to this block because it's preceding it, and it's going to go inside it, and it's going to look for greet. It's not going to find it in that scope, so it's going to go in this sub block, and it's going to find it right there. All right, so now let's uncomment our code, and we're back here. Now let's try something. Let's create a new block like that and have a new declaration of greet saying hi, hello. Let's save. No change. Now, what if we call greet again right there? We get hi, hello. So basically, this function, when called, is using the preceding block, or the closest block which precedes it. So it's not going to use that one. It's going to use this one, which is right before. So what's happening actually when running the code is that when you go in through these blocks, the value of greet, or the function greet, is going to get redeclared every time having a new value. And this is very specific to functions with blocks in ES6. So hopefully this gave you a good understanding of how block scoping affects functions in ES6, and this is very important. Now, you will learn more about this when you go through exercises in this course.